Welcome back, everyone, to the Yogic Studies podcast. I'm your host, Seth Powell, and this is episode 50. Today, we are joined by Dr. Anya Golovkova, who is Assistant Professor of Religion at Lake Forest College in Illinois. Anya, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for making the time. How are you doing today?
Seth, it's great to be here. It's been a very busy day, but I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about your day. Are you in the midst of a semester there at Lake Forest College? Tell us a little bit about maybe what you're teaching right now.
Sure. It's very busy right now, but we're getting spring break next week. So I will have time to do all my recordings that I need to do. I'm teaching, yes, in the midst of teaching. It's a pretty heavy teaching load. I teach 3 classes. Right now, I'm reading with students in one class, the Ramayana, in that class, the Bhagavad Gita. And in the 3rd class, we're getting ready to talk about religion as an invisible determinant of public health with regards to the AIDS crisis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is it a religious studies department or where do you teach?
I'm part of religion. We're called religion, part of a religion department. And I'm only one of 2 full-time colleagues there. So we teach very broadly, which I like. It's fun. But
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty much the opposite of what I do because this is so specialized and so related to my research.
Yes. Yeah. It's great to be able to have such a space where we can allow incredible experts like you to get to offer and teach sort of your passion projects. And we'll talk much more about that and get into your area of expertise. But did I see recently that you just were awarded tenure?
I was just awarded tenure.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. How does that feel?
Amazing. It's a big deal. And as you know, in academia, you've been stamped with approval. You're worthy. We're going to keep you for a while.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think these days, harder and harder to come by. I don't hear as many of those stories as I hear of people who are, struggling to get tenure track positions, filling in with various postdocs or visiting assistant professors or whatever you can scrap together, right? Moving around. So kudos to you. Congratulations. I'm sure, so much hard work that has gone into that, and I'm sure very well deserved. So congrats.
Yeah, it's not a great system, but once you pass tenure, you can, you have some job security, which is really amazing in academia.
Yeah.
And also,
And now hopefully you'll have time to teach courses like this at Yogic Studies on Śrīvidyā.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is a fun new experiment.
Yeah, well, we've been talking for a while and wanting to get you on here, and I'm really excited to have you offer this course and to hear all about what you're going to be teaching. But maybe before we get into the specifics of the course and this topic, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background. How did you become a professor of the religions of India and studying Sanskrit and Tantra?
So I'm from Russia originally, as you can tell by my last name. I did my undergrad in Russia, and then I came to the US to work, and I worked in various professions connected to literature and writing. I was a translator. I managed translators. Then I was managing a publishing department, and I was living in New York City, working a nice corporate job in Midtown Manhattan. And I went to what used to be East West bookstore, and above it was Himalayan Institute of New York. And I, thinking back on it, it's just kind of amazing and bizarre also, because I walked in, I didn't want to study yoga. I said, I want can you please teach me meditation? So that was in 2000. And since then, it's been a journey. From meditation, I became really interested in mantras and Sanskrit. I used to chant a lot, so I wanted to know what I chant. So I started formally studying Sanskrit at Columbia, then went on to get a research master's degree at Oxford, and ended up doing a PhD at Cornell. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I was older than most students at that point. I was 35 when I started graduate school.
Okay.
So the fact that I'm here right now, tenured, is amazing to me because it's been a hard road.
Yeah. So you weren't exposed to any of this necessarily growing up in Russia. It was in the U.S., in New York at East West Books and so forth.
No, no, I was not. I was always interested in religion and spirituality. I grew up in an atheist family, and I was seeking. I was looking for something, and had some adventures along the way. Went and got myself baptized in Russian Orthodox Church, but then was looking for something more and different. So I was really interested in meditation. That was my original interest. But that time in New York City was really amazing for me. I kind of gave myself a liberal arts education while I was working because in Russia, you specialize. You get into university and you study for 5 years your field, just your field. You don't get to choose anything. So this was kind of part of my broad experiment in studying all sorts of things and learning about myself.
And how did you then decide to pursue a PhD in these fields?
I mean, one thing led to another. I never started out thinking, um, I want to be a professor. I didn't have the guts for that. I lost my job. We were outsourced, and I was kind of looking for what am I going to do next because corporate life wasn't working great for me. There was something missing. And I was actually reading the Gita a lot at that time, early 2000s. And when I was reading it back then, now I read it with many different other lenses, but back then, what really struck me was the idea of Swadharma, kind of your own path. And I was really looking for that. So eventually, now looking back, I see the path. It was opening up. Everything was kind of coming together, but it wasn't a conscious choice to do all these things. It just felt like, okay, this is the next right step. I'd like to study Sanskrit. This really feels like something important to me. So I went and got my master's and I studied with Somdev Vasudeva. So from there, you can see how I might end up studying Tantra. So
Was that at Columbia?
at
When he
Columbia,
was there?
in Columbia, I started in 2007.
Okay. Wow. Well,
Yeah. And then from
how
there to like
fortuitous to
standard time. So then, then it was too late. Tantra all the way.
Okay, so you kind of got initiated
Yes,
in the
exactly.
MA with Somdev,
Yeah.
and then that guided you to Oxford to study with Alexis Sanderson. So you caught the bug, you fell in love with studying Sanskrit and languages, but then through folks like Somdev, you also discovered the Tantric traditions. Is that right?
So it's actually interesting. When I was first starting at Columbia, I had to write a paper. I had never written a paper before in English. So my paper to apply for graduate school was on Lalita Sahasranama, which is 1,000 names of the goddess Lalita. It's this same goddess. I've been with this goddess always.
How did you know?
I didn't know then, it's just things open up.
Mm.
Turns out at the Himalayan Institute, that was actually in the depth of the tradition. Śrīvidyā is deeply embedded. It's not really shown to newcomers.
Okay.
But now knowing the mantras, and then I asked my former teacher, and he's like, yeah. So so I was more interested in the popular tradition then. I just didn't know really about tantras. I sort of thought about doing ethnography, but didn't up going that route because Somdev was there and kind of ended up
Mm-hmm.
going the textual route. So, through working with Somdev and Sanderson, I started reading tantras and commentaries. And that's how, this more esoteric part of my scholarship came about. But the heart of it was always there. It's the same goddess.
So, what was your time like at Oxford studying Sanskrit and reading tantras with Alexis Sanderson, who's really considered, the foremost expert in tantra and really redefined the field of tantric studies and the study of Shaivism?
Um, it was a very intense year. I had to produce a thesis and lots of other documents at the end of one year. And I was supposed to have read things in Sanskrit to be able to write about them. And that was really the first time I was reading something chosen by me, well, in consultation, obviously, with Professor Sanderson.
So that was sort of at the master's level, it sounds like. And then you decided to pursue the PhD. And was that at Columbia?
Cornell with Larry
Cornell, excuse me. And how did you end up deciding on a PhD topic?
Well, at that point, I was committed. I was deeply into the intellectual endeavor. So, after studying with Somdev and Alexis Sanderson for 3 years, that was the next right step. So I only applied to a small handful of schools, and it was the luck of the draw. Cornell gave me funding, so I said, okay, it's Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would just apply. Let me just apply and see. And then if I don't get in anywhere, I will apply to a whole bunch of schools. But things ended up with me going to Cornell, which worked out really amazingly well. Larry's an intellectual historian, so his perspective was incredibly helpful for thinking through my historical analysis of Tantra.
So you mentioned that you kind of almost serendipitously had chosen your first research paper on this text, A Thousand Names of the Goddess, and it happened to be from this Śrīvidyā tradition. But how did you really kind of get into this tradition and ended up pursuing that as your PhD work, and now you're writing a book on it and going to be teaching a course for us?
These are kind of, at first, there were two parallel paths. One is the practice, and the other one is the academic path. And they weren't really coming together. And then as I continued along this path, it started merging where I was able to kind of combine everything into what I do and who I am. So I spent a lot of time meditating in India with Amma Sri Karanamai. She talks about this goddess Lalita Tripura Sundari a lot. So Lalita Sahasranama came from her. And then, interesting story, when I moved, well, actually, no, I went up to Cornell a year before to talk to them and kind of meet them and check them out. And I went to a temple that's an hour away from there, which is a Śrīvidyā temple in Rochester, New York.
Mm.
It's the temple, the Śrī Cakra from this temple is in one of Douglas Brooks's books. So there's a lineage there.
Mm.
So I ended up going there, just it was a full moon. They were doing a homa. I went in, I sat down, but I was kind of immediately embraced. The energy there was incredible. And I thought back to myself, I really want something like this. I want this to be something, I want to find a home like this. So then I ended up going to Cornell, and the first time I went back was during Navaratri, and I sat down. I was with my friend who I knew through Amma, and we both sat down. We were kind of late. I wasn't feeling that great. I was like, oh, I wanted to be there earlier and blah, blah, blah. And the guru, Aya Sri Chaitanya Nandanatha, called us up and initiated us.
Okay, just right
So,
there.
so it's like, yeah, and then from there, I spent a lot of time and studied the practices and the mantras and practiced there a lot. And
Just to clarify, especially for our listeners, when you're referring to Amma, you're not talking about the hugging saint Amma, are you? This is a different Amma.
Nama, different Amma. Karuna is compassion. Mai is filled with compassion. That's her name. Not Amritandamai Ma.
Right.
No, I think I got that wrong. Not the hugging Amma. Different mom.
Yeah. Different Amma.
Different Amma from South India.
Yeah, but they were based in Rochester, New York.
Sorry, long confusing story. I met Amma actually in Woodstock. Long story, through an
Okay.
ashram, again, it was serendipitous. Somebody offered me a ride and said, "Do you want to go?" I'm like, "Sure." And that was how I met her. Then I ended up studying a lot with her, just going to India and doing a lot of silent meditation retreats. But it was the Śrīvidyā temple in Rochester where I was able to study initiatory Śrīvidyā and the higher level mantras and the higher level worship.
Mm. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit more towards the end, but I'm sort of tempted here now that you can step back and put your scholar's cap on, and you've really investigated these traditions historically and philologically. Is the Śrīvidyā that they are practicing in this temple, how connected is that to the textual sources and kind of the historical tradition that you write and think about?
It is deeply connected. But it took me some time to see how those connections work. When I first started reading Alexis Sanderson's work and reading about Śrīvidyā through his lens, it was very hard for me to reconcile what I saw as being practiced to the historical tradition. So for example, Alexis Sanderson very much emphasizes love magic.
Mm.
But that's just one aspect. When I actually read the texts, I wouldn't call early Śrīvidyā love magic. There is just so much more. And the deep connection is the mantras changed just a little bit, but it's the same Śrī Cakra, it's the same ritual practice, it's the same goddess. So that is the connection, the ritual connection.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What do you or what does Sanderson mean by love magic? It's an interesting phrase.
He means that in some of the earlier tantras, there are rituals for mundane results. And as you may or may not know, a lot of tantras contain this. So Tantra, and Śrīvidyā in particular, is understood as giving you, well, now is understood as giving you sort of the ultimate knowledge, but also the knowledge of the world. And so anyway, some of the earlier texts contain prayogas. These are ritual for mundane results. And some of those are for attracting women. So these were texts for men, written by men, who wanted to attract underworld women who were running towards them, losing their clothes on the way if they've done the ritual.
Mm.
So of course, if you look at it just at that, then there is a discontinuity. If you look at the ritual structures and the mantras, then there is a deep continuity. Because, the emphasis has changed. How people explain Śrīvidyā has changed. But I think it's a mistake to think about even early Śrīvidyā as love magic. There's just a lot more there. Yes, there are some there's sensual, the goddess is described in a very sensual way. Um there are and there are rituals for attracting women. Can't tell you if they work or not, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but
But we can't reduce the
it's,
tradition
it's just
to
one
that.
aspect of the tradition.
Sure, sure.
Tantra.
So let's back up a little bit and maybe bigger picture here. Tell us what is Śrīvidyā? Perhaps even beginning just with the name, this compound Śrīvidyā.
Right. So Shri is an honorific, and Vidya is knowledge, but also Vidya, in the technical sense, is it's mantra. Vidyas are mantras of feminine goddesses. So for Śrīvidyā, that mantra, the 15 syllable or the 16 syllable mantra, is incredibly important. It's at the core of the tradition. And it's also unusual. It's long. It's not it doesn't have a literal meaning. It's a lot of bija mantras. So the mantra is incredibly important. And I've done a lot of digging
Mm.
On what Śrīvidyā means. And I really think the meaning is connected with the mantra. So Vidya is the mantra of the goddess, but it's also the knowledge of the goddess that is supposed to be conveyed by the mantra.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the explanation of the names. So Douglas Brooks, of course, translated this famously as auspicious wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking it for Sanskrit nerds. I'm taking it as a Bahuvrihi compound, depending on how it's used,
Mm-hmm.
off the auspicious mantra, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Referring to something outside of itself.
Yes, exactly.
Our Sanskrit students will love that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. So what is
That's
Śrīvidyā?
great.
Śrīvidyā is a tantric tradition. It's not any one thing. And that's part of how I teach religion. There is no thing called religion. There are agents. There are people who practice religion. There are organizations, there are churches, whatever. And these people do various things. So I think that's helpful to think about Śrīvidyā in that way. It's the people who practice it, and their emphasis and their interest has changed over time.
So give us a little bit, maybe an overview of maybe some sort of timeline here, understanding how this tradition emerged. How does Śrīvidyā fit kind of within the broader picture of tantric traditions in India?
Sure. I grabbed my notes here back from my master's project.
Sorry.
Because I
what
created
did I write? What did I write again? I forget.
this amazing map.
Fantastic.
I'm going to include in my book.
Maybe as a handout in the course.
Yeah,
Some
somebody
version,
can
some
help me
version of it.
create this. Yes, if somebody can help me create it, let's do
Oh,
it.
I'm sure there'll be a volunteer for that.
Oh, I would be very happy with that. So anyway, Shaivism, right? Shaivism, early Shaiva traditions are Shaiva tantric traditions are ascetic traditions. Over time, there emerge tantric traditions for householders. So anybody can be practicing those various forms of worship, or forms of practice. So again, over time, at first it's the male deity only and the focus on male deity. Over time, interest in female deities emerges, and then there are some goddess traditions that come up. For example, tantric worship of Kali which is focused on the goddess. So early on in the Shaiva traditions, goddess emerges, but only as a consort. Later on, more goddess, like a variety of goddess traditions emerge where the goddess is central figure, and sometimes she's also surrounded by a retinue of goddesses, and that's the case in Śrīvidyā as well. So Śrīvidyā is a later name. It wasn't used in the beginning of the tradition. It was, maybe it's better to talk about it in terms of devotion to Tripura Sundari, or in terms of sampradaya, lineage. That's kind of how early commentators talk about it. Let's see. So Śrīvidyā is one of the later Shaiva Shakta. So tradition is associated with the worship of Shiva and the goddess Shakta, from Shakti, female divine energy. Śrīvidyā is probably later than the worship of Kubjika. It's really one of the latest what's called Kaula traditions. And what I'm seeing already around 10th or 11th century is a very stable ritual tradition that hasn't changed that much up until now. So for over a millennium, this ritual has been practiced. Probably. Let's see. So that's how we learn about dating, is when something is mentioned in another text. That's kind of how we can figure out relative dating. So earlier, a similar tradition, a related tradition of Nitya goddesses is mentioned in various classifications of Kaula traditions. And later on, it becomes Śrīvidyā, and it is seen as the penultimate, as the ultimate. It's placed in the scheme, it's placed at the top. First, there are like 4 traditions, and then they come up with a whole other scheme where there are 4, and then there are 2 more. Of course, they put the Buddhist tradition at the bottom. Whoever is doing classification obviously is going to value things differently. So Śrīvidyā ritual is documented around 11th century, and it continues on, and the interpretation of the tradition is very much influenced by what people are doing and the intellectual environment, and I want to say fashion and fad, but in intellectual life, that also happens. So at one point, non-dual Shaivism became so incredibly important. So then all the tantras were interpreted through that lens, and that became part of Śrīvidyā. And then later on, other interpretations emerge, such as bringing Śrīvidyā closer to Advaita Vedanta. But the ritual and the mantras are the stable core that doesn't change.
Is Śrīvidyā, how does it relate to other forms of Shaiva Tantra that maybe listeners might even be more familiar with, like the traditions of Kashmir, the non-dual forms of Shaiva Tantra? It sounds like it comes a little bit later than those. Does it build upon those earlier scriptural sources and traditions?
Yes.
We have Kashmir, of course, in the north. Today, we mostly think of Śrīvidyā in the south. Do you think, is it a tradition that emerged in the south, or was that a later development? I guess I asked you a few questions there.
Okay, first question, how is it different from other Shaiva tantric systems, right? So every tantric system, Shaiva, Shakta, Buddhist, Jaina, whatever, has its own deity. It may be a pantheon of deities, and they are visualized holding different weapons. Sometimes they sit in a certain way, and that makes them distinctive ritually. So this tradition has goddess Tripura Sundari, the beauty of the 3 cities, at the core. She holds goad and noose, and arrows of flowers and a bow. And later on, it becomes a bow of sugarcane. So that is one distinctive part. The other distinctive part is Śrī Cakra. So most tantric traditions have a yantra of some sort. Śrī Cakra is so unique and so beautiful. It's very complex. I think something about Śrīvidyā that really appeals to people is sort of a combination of complexity. The mantras are also complex. These are non-Vedic mantras. They're different. So it's also ritually incredibly interesting. So for some other traditions, tantric ritual worship has died out. They kind of became almost traditions of, let's see. Like when I think about non-dual Shaivism these days, I'm thinking about discourse and sort of big ideas. I'm not thinking about ritual. But Śrīvidyā was influenced by non-dual Shaivism in its commentaries and interpretations and later tantras, but it remained a ritual tradition. So I will, of course, talk about the goddess during the course and, the details of these changes. It's just mapping it out very sparsely. So your last question, geography.
Yeah, geographically, did it was it more pan-Indic and settled in the south, or did it emerge in the south, or what is the significance kind of it being in southern India?
I think there's a lot we still don't know, and we need to do more research. And in fact, I'm thinking of doing some ethnographic research in Nepal. There are traditions in Nepal that worship this same goddess. I want to learn exactly what they're doing and understand where these are kind of related to Rajputs, so there may be a connection there. This is all very preliminary. Certainly, Śrīvidyā was practiced in Kashmir. Jayaratha, who also commented on Abhinavagupta's Tantra Loka, was a Śrīvidyā practitioner. It wasn't called Śrīvidyā then, but it's the worship of this goddess using the Śrī Cakra. Let's see, geographically. So definitely, there are these various pockets that we know about. And in the south, the temples associated with Shankaracharyas, that tradition is practiced in many of those temples as well. So how did it get to south? I cannot tell you. But I think I've sort of played around with various options. And I think when I go on my tenure, on my sabbatical, I want to do more work in the north and learn more about the practices there and the historical connections there. Southern Śrīvidyā is different. Slightly different emphasis. I can tell you that it's later because the sugarcane does not appear in the early tantras. The goddess's description does not have the bow of sugarcane. It's just like one detail. But it's sort of in the South, when you read the commentaries, they've absorbed everything that came before and added some new emphasis. But the tendency there is to kind of shy away from more kaula things and really make it more accessible and maybe even get rid of some technical terms and make it more acceptable and say, oh, look, we're not that different from Vedic worship, actually. So then a lot of Upanishadic texts and various other, like Advaita Vedanta texts, then become influential for interpreting what this tradition is about.
I wonder if you can say a few words about the word Tantra. When we were trying to come up with a title for this course, we went back and forth with lots of different options. I had originally suggested Śrīvidyā Tantra, and you politely declined that. And so just curious, and we settled, of course, for
Tantric Wisdom.
Śrīvidyā, Tantric Wisdom of the Goddess. So Tantric tradition rather than Tantra. Maybe just say a few words about how you understand that term in relationship to Śrīvidyā.
So I know that the word Tantra now is often used sort of as an umbrella term for Tantric traditions, and I think that's okay. But also it's a little bit amorphous. In Tantric sources themselves, Tantra is a scriptural source, a specific scriptural source in the form of a dialogue between, in my case, Bhairava and the goddess. So I think I'm okay with Tantric traditions, and I think that's an analog maybe to how people use the word Tantra often these days, but also Tantra just by itself has so many negative connotations. And you start thinking about California Tantra and Sting and all that stuff. And this is not what I was going for.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. It's not necessarily what we would call an emic term, right? It's not a term that is used within the texts and traditions themselves. I mean, Sanderson, as you know, has really, categorized, or mapped out these terms in very complex web of charts and directions. But the mantra marga and ati marga and all of these terms, which we needn't get into right now. But the point is that these traditions don't necessarily call themselves Tantra. And as you rightly point out, Tantra is the name of the scriptures, of the texts. So the Tantric traditions are those who draw source texts or draw insight from the Tantras. So what are the main Tantras for Śrīvidyā? What are the main texts or text of this tradition?
Well, there are many. There are many. And I think if we look at the corpus of texts, we should look at Tantras, commentaries on the Tantras, Padatis, ritual texts that describe ritual worship more specifically, and also popular texts about the goddess, such as Lalita Sahasranama, 1,000 Names of the Goddess, or Saundarya Lahari and Ananda Lahari. That's the wave of beauty and bliss. We'll read a little bit from that in the course together. So let's see. Your question was main tantras. I mean, the one I'm focusing in this course on the ones I know the best, and these are the early tantras that I chose for a specific reason. First is Vamakeshvari Mata. It's the earliest extant tantra that we have, so it's really worth looking at. And it lays out the Śrī Cakra and the goddesses, the whole pantheon that abides in the Śrī Cakra. And Yogini Hridaya, Heart of the Yogini, is very interesting because it internalizes non-dual Shaivism. And now this ritual of the Śrī Cakra is being interpreted in different ways. And it uses a lot of language and terminology that comes from non-dual Shaivism, and it's beautiful. It's been translated by Andrei Padu, so we have a nice translation of the Tantra as well. So those are the ones that I've done the most work on. There are others like Tantra Raj. Okay, honestly, this is the best I have, and I think we're gonna read that. And sorry, it's my article in Śrīvidyā from 2010.
Yeah, it's excellent. I was just reading it before our podcast here to review it. It's fantastic overview. So highly recommend it. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Oh, thanks so much. So, but anyway, I talk about different tantras here. Tantra Raja calls itself Kadimata Tantra. Kadi is relating to the principal mantra of one of the sampradayas, one of the ritual lineages. Let's see. Parashurama Kalpa Sutra is incredibly important. I'm not sure if it has the status of a tantra or not, but it's up there and very important. Gyanarnava Tantra. I think also it's important to look at the whole corpus and the different kinds of texts, and also how these different texts are being used and what they were created for. So in this course, I was not able to cover commentaries and the tradition of exegesis of interpreting scriptures, but we'll touch upon it. Do more someday.
I'm sure there's vast disagreement, especially when you get into the commentarial traditions. But if I was to ask you, just how would you summarize sort of the main doctrines of this tradition? And then if you could just sort of briefly sort of summarize the practices and the rituals that sort of support those doctrines.
Interesting. I think we sometimes have this sort of somewhat Orientalist bias towards beliefs. But really, beliefs are important, but the practice here, I feel like it's the core. So for Śrīvidyā, mantras are very important. There are various practices to worship the goddess ritually, but I think most practitioners would agree that Śrī Cakra ritual is considered to be the height of ritual practice. And it's very complex. It takes many hours. Well, there are different versions. You can condense or you can expand. So actually, it's amazing. It's like, you've got the base and you can build up on the base. Remind me, what was summarize the main doctrines.
I like your point. It's an important point. I think that we think of orthodoxy, and there's orthopraxy, which is to say a right way to practice and to do, and the efficacy of ritual and things like yoga and dhyana and meditation, visualization. Nonetheless, wouldn't you say that those practices, though, they are built upon sort of a particular view or an understanding of oneself and the world and relationship to the goddess in this case? Let me ask you, is this a non-dual philosophical tradition?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that was what I was going to talk about. If I try to summarize the doctrines, it's the understanding of the identity between the goddess, the guru, and the practitioner. So that is as non-dual as it comes. So
is there any significance about it? You mentioned some of the earlier forms of non-dual tantric Shaivism. They place Bhairava or Shiva kind of at the center or at the top of this hierarchy of divinities in a non-dual world. But what is the significance here of that being female and being the goddess?
Well, the focus now is different. The principal deity is Tripura Sundari. She is considered to be the cosmic deity. She is now the one who controls the three functions of that are usually given to the male gods: creation, sustaining, and dissolution. She's the same as the Śrī Cakra, and the Śrī Cakra is kind of like the way to map out her emanation in the world. And her emanation is also the same as emanation of the universe. Śrīvidyā is also connected with language and sound. That's very important. So the goddess is Matrika. She's the ultimate mother. She's the matrix, but also the goddess of the phonemes. Um,
Sometimes when people talk about or think about goddess traditions today, especially outside of an academic context, sometimes there's a romanticization, I find, of thinking that goddess traditions are maybe more pro women or giving more agency to female practitioners. And I think historically, across cultures, this is not always the case. Um, what about for Śrīvidyā? What is the role of female practitioners, maybe even female gurus within this tradition? Maybe historically, and then maybe also thinking about today.
yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, not only in terms of Śrīvidyā and Tantra, but also in terms of, let's say, mainstream texts about the goddess, such as the Devi Mahatmyam, Glory of the Goddess. I think it can be incredibly inspiring for women. I think it can be, it's really fun to read these texts that are about the goddess being supreme and describe all her beauty and magnificence. But religious traditions, not just tantric traditions, but religious traditions everywhere are very much patriarchal at their base. So this one is no different. Yes, we know there were female gurus. So, for example, there is a sort of a mythological figure, Lopamudra, the wife of Agastya and founder of Lopamudra Sampradaya.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, I can't verify that, but historically, we can verify that there were some female gurus. I haven't done work on that. I've looked at the very earliest strata. There's just so much to do. So I haven't really come across women being ritual specialists in the earliest texts. But even now, and we'll talk about that in the course, contemporary, it just depends on the teacher. Some teachers will allow, women will allow people from different castes, and others will not. So there is a huge variation of how people interpret that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure that's something that has been negotiated and changed, over the centuries. I mean, Śrīvidyā is unique, right, in that there is this living contemporary tradition. We don't find that with many of these other pre-modern medieval tantric traditions. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, I don't know everything, but Sanderson tells us that a lot of these traditions that he writes about died out. I haven't traveled all of South Asia to study everything that's being practiced and how unbroken those lineages are, but everybody knows about Śrīvidyā and the fact that it's practiced, people write about it. So it's pretty incredible that we have texts over a millennium and more.
Are there any reasons that jump out at you of why that this tradition has sustained for so long?
Well, I mean, I mentioned something along those lines before. I think people are very much attracted to complex ritual structures. But also, this tradition allows for devotion, for creativity in how you worship the goddess. So I think it's this combination. And also, this is also related to what you asked earlier. How's this tradition different? This goddess is not a fierce goddess of the cremation grounds who's going to go and like violently kill all your enemies.
Mm.
She's kind of benign and lovely. So it's a very different flavor of
Yeah.
devotion.
Yeah. Allows for a little bit more mainstream, perhaps less um, countercultural. I mean, as you mentioned, it was adopted by these Shankaracharyas and these mattas. She was institutionalized in many ways in the late medieval, early modern period, right?
Correct. And again, I haven't studied all of it. and there is a lot more work that needs to be done there. I think people are interested in something that's esoteric, that's something that is not available to everyone, something that's unique and special. But I really think at the base of its popularity is the complexity of ritual and mantras and their uniqueness. And the fact that, it didn't become just an intellectual endeavor, but the complex ritual was always a huge part of it.
All right. Well, we're starting to wind down here, but I would love for you to just talk a little bit about the course itself. I'm going to pull up, can you see that on the screen here?
Yes.
Our beautiful header image, which I have to point out, this beautiful Śrī Cakra, or Śrī Yantra as it's called, is done by yourself. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I painted it many, many years ago. I painted it with the appropriate mantra as I was painting it. I actually used it as a cover for my master's thesis at Columbia. So I'm thrilled we're using it, but I painted it according to traditional instructions in the learning from students of Harish Johari.
Yeah. I am familiar with Harish Johari. I met several of his students at an ashram in Hardwar that we were connected to years ago. Peter Veltegard, I want to say, was one of his close students. Anyways, I was delighted to see this because actually, as you know, we were looking for images of this on the internet, and a lot of the copies that we were able to find just weren't of such great quality. And then you said, "Oh, well, I have one that I made. Maybe we can use." So it's absolutely beautiful and really captures kind of the heart of the tradition. So here we are, YS 133, Śrīvidyā, Tantric Wisdom of the Goddess. It's going to run live at Yogic Studies from March 24th through April 18th, 2025. It's now, as of today, it's open for enrollment. So please do jump on and join us. Maybe you can tell us a little bit just about the 4 modules and how you're approaching the course and what students can expect.
Absolutely. So the first module is an introduction. So we'll talk about the broader context of tantric traditions. We'll define tantric and esoteric and talk about the categories. And we'll look at the range of Shaiva and Shakta Shaiva traditions, and also what makes a tradition tantric. I also would like to start with talking about practice and also the various contexts that have shaped Śrīvidyā. So looking at geography in more detail and looking at the history of the tradition in more detail. And I'm a historian of religion. So this is while I'm going to be teaching about Tantric Śrīvidyā, I also want to share with you how I read texts. How do scholars learn about history and changes, and how ritual changes, and how interpretation changes? So then, connected to that, we move on to the second module, where we actually look at precursors to Śrīvidyā, and we look at the earlier traditions and some similarities with this tradition. And this sets the stage then for looking at early Śrīvidyā tantras. My undergrad was in English, actually. I'm an English major. I love literature. I love beautiful literary descriptions. So I want to share that as well, because I really appreciate beautiful visualizations that come from within the tradition. So we'll look at some of my translations. And for the early Śrīvidyā tantras, as I mentioned, we dive deeply into ones that I'm most familiar with, which are really great and interesting. The Vamaki Shveri Mata, and we'll talk about the ritual structure of the Śrī Cakra, and her retinue of subordinate goddesses. And we'll talk about sort of the scope of the Vamakeshwari Mata. And we'll also include Yogini Hridaya and talk about how ritual then was reinterpreted through the lens of non-dual Shaivism. It's like non-dual Shaivism became the language in which people spoke and then reinterpreted the tradition in that way. And then for the fourth module, we look at Śrīvidyā today. So we look at some existing scholarship. There's a lot actually to do. We cannot do everything in one course, but we do look at such issues as how do people interpret Śrīvidyā, what do people say about Śrīvidyā, also degrees of secrecy and access. And here the issues with ritual purity and ritual transgressions come up. So, I mean, who is allowed to touch which things? That matters. And that's going to differ, and that's going to also allow for initiation of different people, different groups of people. And we talk about the spread of Śrīvidyā worship beyond South Asia. I really like Corinne Dempsey's book that she published in 2006. So we'll read a little bit from her work as well. The Goddess Lives in Upstate New York, which is actually about the temple that I was mentioning earlier.
Okay.
And it's really
a
great ethnography. It's a great, sometimes I start my Hinduism course with this book because it's like you enter the temple, you begin to learn about Hinduism.
I like that.
To learn about Tantra. So, and then I want to also expose you to devotional literature. So we'll read a translation of Saundarya Lahari, The Wave of Beauty.
Fantastic.
I'm excited. It's a lot, but I think we can reasonably expect to do this within 4 weeks and then fill in some blanks and gaps during the Q&A session.
Absolutely. So again, this is going to run from March 24th to April 18th live. But if you're listening or watching this in the future, then everything has been recorded and you can take this at your own pace for self-study. All right, Anya. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story and your passion and knowledge of Śrīvidyā. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on today, maybe that we didn't get to discuss, or any final words?
I don't think so. I think we did a very comprehensive review of my past and Śrīvidyā past and present.
Yeah. Tell us the name of your forthcoming book, your monograph on this topic.
Well, the name is not set in stone.
Okay.
It will be something like, I keep playing around with different names. The goddess for the Second Millennium.
Well, maybe if you take the course, then maybe you'll come up with the name of the book and you can get credit for it or something like that. Oftentimes, we have, through teaching and structuring a course, right, into these modules, chapters can be born of that, books can come out of that. I think pedagogically, it's very rich, and as as a teacher, that interaction with students is so dynamic, and so yeah, hopefully, sometimes it's great when the book hasn't been finalized yet because you can keep refining it through the classroom process.
I do find that explaining things to others is very clarifying for my own thinking. So I appreciate the opportunity. Really looking forward. As you can probably tell, I really care about this. I love this, and I want to share it with you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, Anya, and thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and we hope to see you in class for this great exploration of Śrīvidyā, Tantric Wisdom of the Goddess. So thanks again, Anya. Take care.
It's not much to say.
And we'll see you soon.